Thank you for inviting me, and good morning, everybody. I understand that you're a bit sleepy, so I'll go slowly here. I'm a cognitive scientist, and I'm interested in modeling knowledge in general, and in semantics in particular. And today I will focus on two topics: actions and events. How can we understand them? And I will think about them as a cognitive model of how we understand actions and how we understand events. And that's what I want to present to you. So my menu is that first I give you some kind of background, my modeling tool, which is what I call conceptual spaces. It's based on geometry, topology, rather lightweighted, but anyway. And then I will use this to present some kind of ideas of how we understand actions. And the main idea is that we identify the force patterns around us in the world. And based on that, I will get onto events. That's the second step. And I have a two-vector model of events. And as an application of these models of actions and event, I will talk about the semantics of verbs. It's more linguistically oriented. But I think there are connections to robotics here as well, because you want to understand, if you're building an artificial agent, how to interpret the behavior of others and be able to model them and describe them. So the semantics of verbs is of some interest. But the focus will be on actions and events. But as a starter, let's go to the conceptual spaces. So I think of our perception, no, I shouldn't say our perception, but our thinking as organized into spaces. And these are built on what I call quality dimensions. So you have things like space, time, temperature, weight, color, force, shape. I mean, all the things we use to sort out the world when we perceive it. And it's an open-ended list, and in many cases there are lots of abstract domains that I will come back to. And one that I will focus a bit on today is the force domain. Now, these domains, this is a very central point, they have a certain structure, a geometrical topological structure. So just to give you a very simple example of what I mean by this structure, I mean, we have this representation of the timeline as a full real line, I mean, without a beginning and without an end. But if we think about the weight domain, it's only the positive real numbers. We don't think about negative weights. So there is a difference in the underlying structure of these two domains. Here is a slightly more interesting example, and this is how we perceive colors. And now I'm emphasize that this is the human perception of colors. It has nothing to do with descriptions of wavelengths and anything like that. And our perception is divided into three dimensions. One is the hue. I mean, going from red via blue, green, and yellow. And that is a circular dimension, which may seem a little bit odd. But you know that we have these complementary colors. So if you stare at the yellow dot and then look at the white wall, you will have a purple after image and so on. So there are these complementarity effects. And then the second dimension is the intensity. I should have written gray here in the center. And then you have more and more intensive colors going out to the rim of this circle. And the third dimension is the brightness. White up here and black down here. I could have added those words as well. These three dimensions are not totally independent. As you get close to the white end, you can make fewer discriminations. It's more difficult to discriminate the light orange from a light red and so on. And the same thing happens down here when you get close to the black. Not so much discrimination. So this space is based on how we judge similarities of colors. And it's lots of psychophysics there. I mean, you collect data from a number of subjects on how they judge, and then you use various techniques, you end up with a space that looks roughly like this. I mean, there are variations of them, but all of them are three-dimensional. So this is a fairly typical example of what I mean by a conceptual space. You have the domain of colors, and it has a certain geometric structure. Many domains are rather uninteresting. They are just real lines, or half real lines, but there are some more interesting ones. And I'll get back to that. So, Then, as I said, they represent human cognition. We're not talking about how physics would represent these domains. I mean, that's not what's of interest here. And a very important thing is the role of similarity, because the spaces can represent similarity. The closer 2 points are in the space, the more similar are the colors, or more similar are the temperatures, or whatever. So closeness means similarity in the space. That is important. I mean, if you compare this kind of knowledge representation to traditional symbolic representations in logical calculus or in artificial intelligence and so on, you have the predicates, but there is nothing in the predicates that tell you whether one predicate is similar to another one. But this similarity is somehow built into this representation. And I think that's a very important feature. I make a distinction between properties and concepts. I mean, this is my distinction. So a property I define as in terms of a region of a domain. And I add this assumption that it's a convex region. And actually, that's a very productive assumption. While a concept in general is more complicated. I mean, if we think about the concept of a dog doesn't have, I mean, a property is typically a color. I mean, that's one single domain. But most concepts relate to several domains. I mean, the dog has a size, it has a shape, it has a color, it has a smell, it has a temperature, it has, I mean, there are lots of domains that apply to the concept of a dog or to a chair or whatever. I mean, many concepts are associated with lots of domains. And the domains are more or less important for identifying the concept. I mean, the shape of a dog is much more important than its color, for instance. And then the regions are correlated. The sound of a dog is related to his size, for instance, correlated with his size. So a concept is a more complex thing. But let me say a little bit more about well, yeah, I can say also that for those of you who are familiar with frame theory, I mean, frames have a lot of slots, and you fill in with values and so on. What I do is, you can say that I have, this concept is a little bit like a frame, except that I add the geometric structure to the different slots of variables of a frame. Let me go back a little bit to the idea of a property. So here is the color space again. And let's take the color red. It corresponds to a region of the color space. And the idea of convexity simply means that if something is judged to be red, and something else is judged to be red, and anything in between is also judged to be red. I mean, convexity is just betweenness. And here is an example from a psychological experiment where they've tried out this. They showed people, this is made by 2 Swedish psychologists, they showed people different color shapes, and they had just asked them to name the color shapes. And then they looked for when you got, what shapes in the color space were named brown. So if you look at the color circle from above, you have the yellow, the red, the blue, and the green. So the brown falls in the yellow-red quarter. If you look at it from the side, I mean, this is the cutting out the different slices from the side. So this is white, this is, well, yellow here, and this is black. And here it's orange, and so on, here it's red. So you see that, and so gray is here. So it belongs to the dark area. Brown colors are in the dark area. And the different shades here correspond to the number of people who accept it as brown. So there is a prototype, there is a central orange part, and quite dark orange, that is called the typical brown. But you get shades here. So out here there's only 2 persons. But as you see, the regions in this experiment come out very nicely as convex regions. I mean, there is this only exception here, but here down to 2 people, so it's really statistical aberration. It doesn't matter whether concepts are vague. You can still apply the convexity. Vagueness simply says that if something is accepted to some degree as red, and something else is accepted to the same degree as red, then anything in between should be red. So you don't need to have sharp borders here in these concepts. You can start from prototypes. I mean, I talked about prototypical colors, and if you have a space, I mean, here I have a two-dimensional surface as a space. If you have ordinary Euclidean metrics, I'm not assuming that we have Euclidean metrics all the time. You start with prototypes. Then you can find a very simple rule for dividing the points of the space by saying that all points are associated with their closest prototype. So if this point is closer to P2 than it's to P4 and P5, so it's associated with P2. And that generates what's called a Voronoi tessellation. And it's very easy to show that this simple rule, associate any point with its closest prototype, ends up with convex partitionings of the space. So prototype, using prototypical representatives will generate these convex regions.
Question, for understanding. This would imply that the prototypes will always follow the topology of the conceptual space. Is that psychologically reasonable?
No, and the prototype is a point in the space. So it has, I mean, it has the dimensions of the.
But I could teach you a new prototype.
Yeah.
Right, and it might be like cutting across a range of conceptual spaces, or it might even change in some sense. If it's all about nearest neighbor, it might change that topology.
No. I mean, no. I would say that the space is there. Then you can teach. I mean, let me give you my teaching example, because it comes here. Yeah. So if you have, this is a space. I mean, I depict it as two-dimensional spaces, but the mathematics generalizes to any number of dimensions. So if you observe a number of exemplars, birds or colors or shapes or whatever, so they are located as points. Your individuals become, the objects become points in a space. So if you've learned, let's say we talk about birds. So you see these birds, and you hear they're all called ducks. I mean, these black circles here. These light circles are all called geese, and these are all called swans. And based on these, you can form a kind of prototype. What is the, I mean, here I made a simple assumption that the prototype is just the average of what you've seen of this concept. I mean, I'm not giving the prototype any other, but there are different ways of identifying the prototype. But if you do, the prototype is an average of the observations you've had. You can then generate a partitioning. So when you observe a new object, you will know what category it belongs to.
But if I make a chimera,
yeah,
that is a goose duck.
Yeah.
Okay, then this can now become a new partition in your conceptual
yes,
space.
Yes. I mean,
I can make chimeras.
Yes.
Can I make a goose elephant? That now deforming your conceptual space.
Yeah. No, it doesn't deform it because the shapes are already represented. The chimera is a possible shape in this, or possible individual in this shape of animals, let's say. So it still has a point. And what you're doing now is that you're introducing a new concept. And that concept will have its representatives. I mean, you have different kinds of chimeras, or you have different kinds of centaurs, or whatever. And they will generate a region in the space. World is not always simple. Sometimes you observe a new exemplar that somebody insists that this odd-looking thing that was associated with the geese is indeed a duck. It is a duck. Then what happens is that if you accept this classification, you have to change your opinion. And what happens is that your prototype will move a little bit in this direction towards this strange individual. And then the borders will shift. So on this form of learning mechanism, that you extract what is common to the individuals, the borders between concepts will not be fixed. And that's important, because we know from how kids learn language and how we ourselves learn language, we are able to adjust the borders of our concepts. And using this simple geometrical idea, I can model these shifts in meanings. What is fixed here, I mean, I don't know if Paul is satisfied with my answer, is the underlying space that is given by our perceptual mechanism.
I just want to bring that point now to the foreground, but that's sort of an important assumption.
Yes, of course it is. Yeah. No, I mean, you can change your space by practicing your perception, by adding further details and dimensions, and I'll get back to that in a few minutes. So I use this distinction between properties and concepts to make a very simple mapping between properties as mapping onto adjectives. I mean, adjectives in general, I won't say that this is a 100% safe rule, but in general, adjectives denote a single property. You have color words, you have size words, you have shape words, and so on. And they denote a property. While nouns in general denote more complicated things. There are relations between different domains. So this is the first mapping between linguistic categories and conceptual structures. I will spend a lot more time on the mapping to verbs because that's my new idea here. This was already in my old book on conceptual spaces. Here's an example of a concept. I mean, an apple. An apple has color, taste, shape, nutritional values, and maybe other features. It has a weight, it has a temperature, but they are normally, the weight and temperature of an apple are normally not important for classifying apples. We use, I mean, color, they are red, green, and yellow, and that forms a region of the space. The taste, we have 4 dimensions of space, or maybe 5 if you count umami. We have sweetness, sourness, bitterness, and saltiness. And when it comes to apple taste, it's mainly sweet and sour dimensions that are important for calling things an apple. We have shapes. I mean, it's difficult to describe the shape of an apple, but we can distinguish an apple from a pear quite easily by its shape. I mean, the taste of an apple and a pear are not so dissimilar, but the shape, we do it. And then, of course, when you get older, you learn about the nutrition values of apples and so on. If you become a pomologist, I think it's called, I mean, someone who specializes in fruits, you learn about further features about apples and so on. So this list of domains is in a sense, open-ended. But some of them are more or less characteristic for defining what an apple is. When you're a kid, you learn about an apple from its color, its taste, and its shape. I mean, these are the basic domains that you use to learn what is the meaning of apple. Then you can add further information. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So how in your model do you bind the features across the domains? I mean, obviously, closely related concepts, say different fruits will occupy then different coherent regions in the different domains. And so if you want to distinguish apple from whatever peaches, you have to bind different regions across these domains to obtain different objects. So how do you do that?
No. I mean, you have a multidimensional space. I mean, you have the product space of all the domains, and that you will have a product region where all. I mean, there is the color part of the product space, there is the taste part of the product space, and so on. So you will have a high-dimensional region, and my proposal is that should still be convex region. I mean, I can. Hardly test it, yeah.
What I'm thinking about, for instance, think about fruit salad. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're going into a composite object that is obviously composed of more atomar or less global concepts.
Yeah.
And so to activate fruit salad in this high-dimensional conceptual space, you actually have sub-objects or components of this complex expression.
Okay, fruit salad would be difficult for me to put into
I think the world is sort of full of fruit salad.
Yeah. No, I agree. But there is another answer to your question of connecting, because, well, it's complex objects are difficult to describe. I mean, they are, and I have some ideas, but I haven't prepared very much for it. Let me give you one example, and I think it comes here. It will come, and that is no, it's not Biedermann. It's more, but Biedermann. I talked about the shape domain, and we don't have very good ideas about how human mind organizes shape. We're very good at identifying shapes. I mean, we have to only see a silhouette of a thing, and we can identify the shape of it. So Marr already had an idea of how we identify the shapes, and he decomposed objects into cylinders, or rather into generalized cylinders, which is a slightly more complicated thing. And then he. This is not only shape, this is already getting into the action. And then he had a hierarchy. I mean, a human was basically a vertical big cylinder. You can break it down into legs and arms, and you can break down the arms into forearm, upper arm, and hand, and you can break down the hand. So it's a hierarchy of representations. So this is maybe a partial answer to your question. And there are, here are some different. I mean, you have, this is the human, this is the quadruped, this is a bird, and then you can break down the quadruped into cow, horse, and giraffe, and you can have an ostrich and a dove, and so on. I mean, using only the cylinders, you get very rough representations, but there is something like it. And there are other models. You mentioned Biedermann. This is another computational model from Zhou and Yui. And they looked very much at the axis of the object and used them to identify it. And as you can see, I mean, just giving you the silhouette, you can see a lot. We are good at identifying the shape of an object. We have a lot of information. Then, of course, how you describe this mathematically is a bit of a trick, but it can be done as a hierarchy of vectors in terms of shapes. Fruit salad is more, would need a different. So your question basically boils down to how can I combine mereology with conceptual spaces? It can be done, I think, and I have done a little bit of work on it. But you get some ideas from this shape. But I don't want to talk about mereology today, so I hope you don't mind. Okay, that is the background. I mean, to give you some notions of the domain is very important here, and the ideas about convexity and so on, the distinction between properties and concepts. Now let's do an application of this general framework to actions. And the question is, how do we identify actions? We're quite good at it, as I will show in a second. But we know very little about the topology of action space. I mean, we know something about shape space. We know very little about action space. So, as I said, it was Morin Weiner who started to analyze walk. They used differential inequalities like this. I mean, as a first approximation of how we represent walking. I mean, there is this pattern of movements of the parts, and you can break it down into finer parts and so on. Let me show you. I see if I can do this. I have to see if I can make a trick on you. Maybe you can see what is this already, but if you can't, I gave you 2/10 of a second or something like that, and you could immediately identify what it is. I mean, I'm sorry. I should go back. Where's the error here? Now I'll show you some more movies. I mean, you see very quickly. This is based on a particular technique developed by Gunnar Johansson, a psychologist in Sweden in the 1950s. I mean, what is happening here, you get very little information. These are movies from a former PhD student of mine, Paul Hemmeren. But you can very quickly, I mean, Gunnar Johansson established that within 2/10 of a second, 200 milliseconds, you see not only that it's a human moving, you see what the human is doing. And so the technique is based on putting light bulbs here on the joints. And it's quite important that you put it on the joints. Otherwise, it works, but it doesn't work so strongly. Why does it have to be put on the joints? Because in 3D, the distance between this point and that point is constant, no matter how I move my arm. And distance between that point and that point is constant. But if I put the lights there, and I do like this, the distance will be changing. So somehow the brain assumes that when two dots are moving adjacent to one another, they have a fixed distance. The brain makes automatically this assumption. And then if you have these moving advertisement banners all over town. I mean, there are points moving. No points moving, it's just lights going on and off and so on. Or a TV screen is the same phenomenon, actually. Maybe you have seen this example this is on the web. I mean, you could just go to Biomotion Lab. This is based on a simulation based on Gunnar Johansson's experiment. You can change the parameters here. So if you make the person more male, they will change the gait. And if you can make it more female, you can make the person more happy, and you can make it more sad, and so on. You can combine these 4 parameters. But the point here is that we get very little information. I mean, I think there are 12, maybe 14 dots. In this, Johansson had 12 dots working with. The brain we don't see anything about the shape of the object, only the relative positions. We don't see anything of the color, any other surface features. We only see the relations between these points and how they change. And that's enough for us to see, pick out the action of the person. I mean, for me, this is very important. Action is not dependent on any other domains than the relative movements of the parts of the object. That's what we need, at least for human action. And I'm hoping that I can generalize it to other forms of action. I mean, biological motion, we are quite good at doing these things. Sorry. I'll go back to this, and then there is some speculation on how this works, and I borrowed some idea from Gies and Poggio. They talk about, I mean, the form pathway, the more ventral pathway in the brain, and the motion pathway, the more dorsal pathway. And you have, I mean, this is the receptive field of the different neurons. Here are the brain areas involved in it. Some of the areas represent monkey areas. So, I mean, you start with V1 very, very local, and then you end up with more holistic representations of a person, and then you can maybe have a classificatory system somewhere. But then in the motion pathway, you have local motion detectors, and then you have optical flow pattern neurons. I mean, they are speculating that we have these neurons for recognizing patterns. And that's what I need for my argument here, that we have some system for recognizing motion patterns in the brain. I mean, I don't know exactly how to identify it, and this is not at all my field, but they have this assumption that there is something. So I will make that assumption too, that our brains are very good at extracting motion patterns. But not only that, and the next thing is that, and this comes from a follower of Gunnar Johansson, Sverker Runesson. He says that when we see something moving, we don't only see the movement. Our brains extract the forces. Basically, the brain takes the second derivative of the motion and picks out the forces that are underlying it. And this is a stronger assumption, and I don't have very much support for it, but that's a hypothesis I am working with here, that when we see these moving figures, what we see are really the forces involved behind the movement. We can pick out whether somebody is straining him or herself. Actually, they made a variation of these dot light experiments where a person dressed in black and in a black room lifted a black box, and you had these the lights on the body. And the person lifted the box, and the weight of the box was between 2 kilos and 20 kilos. And on the movie, you see nothing of the box. You only see the person lifting the box. Then the subjects watching the movies had to judge what is the weight of the box. I mean, the range is between 2 and 20 kilos. And the subjects were correct within a marginal of 1 kilo in judging the weight that was lifted, just by looking at the person who lifted it. So you could pick out the forces that the person had to compensate, leaning back when it was a heavy box and not leaning back so much, and so on. Yeah.
Are you talking about forces about every individual joint?
Yes.
Because that's. Do you have an example also for that?
No, I don't really have an example, except that now I go back to this, kind of hierarchical vectors. You have a general force moving you further, and then you break it down into more particular forces. So just as you have a hierarchical vector representation of a body constitution, you would have a hierarchical representation of vectors as well here, of forces here as well. So it's not a single force, but it's a pattern of forces. I'll give you one example. Okay, that's my hypothesis. I mean, the fundamental cognitive representation is the pattern of forces that generates. That's how we identify actions. And we can judge similarities, and they show prototype effects. I mean, if you look at human motion, you can look at persons running, you can look at persons walking, and you can look at persons jumping or whatever we saw in this movie. We all agree that running is more similar to walking than running is to jumping, or to whatever, waving. Because the force patterns involved in running and walking are similar. They're not identical. There is a certain shift when you go into running. But still, I mean, they're same basic movements. So we can judge similarities. We can establish that our prototype effects, the prototype effects for actions, are very similar to prototype effects for objects. I had this PhD student, Paul Hemmer, and he did all these prototype studies of actions, and show that all the same phenomena that you had for static objects showed up in actions as well. And I can say then, if I talk about a multidimensional force space, I mean, I can't really identify it. I can talk about the convex region in that space as well. I mean, similarity and partitioning the space into regions.
I don't understand the reasoning. How did you get to the forces? So, I mean, so far it was all based on kinematics, right? I mean, the observations, and there are also some indications that the brain may also, at least at some parts, work on kinematics. So why it has to be forces? Why dynamics?
Okay. You mean you're saying that I could do with the kinematics? I don't need the forces. It's a fairly good point. I don't have any really good direct answer to it. I think I can give a better answer when we get to the verbs. It's a matter of how you identify the similarities, because if you do, I mean, forces would be second derivatives of motion here, and what you see are the beginnings and the ends. In a force pattern, they would be marked by peaks in the second derivatives. If you do motion, you wouldn't have the same peaks. So by different forms of similarity measures, I mean, this goes back to how you judge similarities between the actions. And I think that you would get more, this would be my answer, you would get more natural similarity judgments if you do it on the forces rather than on the kinematics. Do you follow my point here? Yeah. Okay. That's because when we identify an action, very much it's the beginning and the end of a movement that is crucial, rather than what goes on in between. And you pick up that better with the second derivative than you do with. Yeah.
Maybe the problem is that if you would think about, let's say, the movement system as, let's say, using based on springs or something like this, with joints, then if you really talk about the force, you must know these internal properties of the spring system, otherwise you don't know what force needs to be applied.
Yep.
So in some sense, what you're describing is really a change in position, the dynamics of positions, which comes about by applying forces. So maybe if to use force in a too literal sense might be inappropriate in this case.
It's not sufficient to have just but you also have to have information that these two parts hang together.
Sure.
I mean, that's
constraint.
Well, it's a constraint, yes.
No,
Yeah.
but I'm saying just using the word force maybe introduces unclarities that actually don't even matter for you, right? Because in some you talk about dynamics in the kinematic space, and that using that you can classify action.
Yeah.
This is actually the real issue.
Okay, yeah, fine.
So maybe you call it force is distracting.
Yes, maybe at this point, but maybe I'll get back to it, because okay, I can give you a partial answer already now, because when we talk about forces in verbs, we don't only talk about physical forces, we talk about mental forces and social forces, power relations and things like that. And we think of them as attracting or repelling factors in relations as well. And so that's why there is no dynamics or kinematics there, but there is still something that brings in what I call a force dynamics in the situations. That's one reason why I use the terminology. But so far, you're perfectly right. I mean, this is just dynamics.
But in this representation, it doesn't ascribe any importance to the goal of an action?
Not yet. No, it doesn't. There is no intentionality built in. I can add that, but that would add further. And I will get back to that in terms of the verbs as well. There is no intentionality here so far. But that's an additional aspect of actions, whether it's intentional or not. So far, I'm only doing biological motion, and I'm hoping to generalize it. Yeah, Friedman.
Okay. Force happens maybe it's good to say explicitly what it means exactly. So when I grasp, it means force to pull apart the fingers, open the hand, force to move forward, force to apply force to contract the finger, to get it around the object, and so on and so forth. So it's a sequence, a well-timed sequence of motor command.
Yes. Yes.
Is this correct?
This is correct, and I think that I have an example of this, not the hand, but the mouth. So this is an example from phonetics. It's Goldstein's theory, the so-called gestural theory of phonetics. So you have different parts of the mouth. Velum is the top of the mouth, the lips. This is the back of the tongue. This is the tip of the tongue. This is the larynx. And when you pronounce a word, this is the word team. You start with the tip of the tongue, and there is well, they are coupled somehow. There is this T sound is made here. Then you open the larynx, and the back is, I don't know what palatal narrow is, but it's a constraint on this movement. Then you get into the vowel in the middle, and the velum is made wider, and then you close your lips. You get this bilabial closure, and that when it comes to the M. So this is a force pattern involving 5 components. It's onset and offset of certain muscular controls in producing a sound. So this kind of picture fits quite nicely with my idea of a force pattern. This is how we generates words. So you can think of this as a representation of force, and of course there are constraints. They have to be very precisely timed. I mean, these double arrows means that these things have to change at the same time. So I mean, in phonetics we have a bit of an analysis of how we produce the sounds. For other body motions we don't have that exact analysis, but I think it can be done. We know a little bit about the walking structures and others, but there are lots of actions we don't know how to represent in this way. So we have to, in order to get more information about action shape, we have to find out much more about the similarities between actions, to find out how we categorize them. And with modern techniques we can do that. I mean, we can start with, I mean, this is, for instance, I think this is from karate, and it's from experiment by Giese and his collaborators again. You have different karate actions. I mean, they have names and categories in karate. And this is one action, and this is another action. And then you can make a morph, which is like looking for the point between the 2 points. Now you have a complex temporal sequence of force patterns. But you can still make a morph, and making the morph means that you're creating a point in between in this high-dimensional motion space. And then you can judge whether this is more similar to that one or to that one. And by doing these kinds of tests, you can get some information about what factors of the action space are important for identifying it as that karate movement or as that karate movement. I mean, this takes a lot of psychophysical experiments, creating a lot of movies and so on. But that's what people have done with the color space. I mean, they have had these color ships and then asked people from different languages to categorize things. Oh, speaking of languages, I forgot to mention that I made this hypothesis that all color terms are convex in all languages. And at that time, there was only a few languages that had been tested. But then Gerhard Jäger in Tübingen, he went out and checked. There is a world color survey, and he had about 110 languages. Where you had information about how they partitioned the color space. I mean, different languages carve up the color space in different ways. But he found an agreement of somewhere like 94% of the languages had regions that were convex. And because many of the languages only had a few informants, there is a lot of statistical noise in the data. So I think 94% is a very strong confirmation for the principle that all color concepts are convex, given the color space. And of course, I would like to have something similar for the action space where we don't have the data, and it takes a hell of a time to collect it. So, yeah. But I mean, I have this hypothesis about how we identify actions. Here's another experiment by Giese and Lappi. They made these kind of morphings things. They had 4 basic movies: walking, running, marching and limping, and you can put them in a pyramid. I mean the four corners, and then you can make morphs where you mix different proportions of walking and marching together, and then you get the pyramid shape. And then I ask people, is this walking or marching? I mean, so running, these points at that corner were called running, these were called limping, and walking is looking from the pyramid from the top. And you see, you get basically convex regions. This is a bit of an artificial example because the pyramid is constructed artificially, but still. And even if you take very different movements, like walking, knee bend, aerobics, whatever that is, and boxing, you still get this kind. I mean, you can do really odd morphings between boxing and knee bend or whatever. You still get some kind of convexity relation here. So this principle seems to work also for action. I mean, this is limited evidence, but it's still some evidence for this form of representation. So, actions are, in my model, they are force patterns. They are dependent on the force domain. We don't care about shapes, we don't care about sizes, we don't care about colors or temperatures when we identify actions. It's the force patterns that identify actions. And that is quite important when I now get to the model of events. So here is my model of, I should just say that in philosophy, there are lots of metaphysical analysis of what an event is. That's interesting, but that's not what I'm concerned with. I'm interested in the cognitive models, that how we mentally represent an event. And there is actually not very much done on that. Then there are linguistic expressions describing events and so on. Lots of linguists are interested in events. And sometimes they confuse this. I mean, this is a typical example from linguistics. They analyze break as that X acts in a manner that causes Y to become broken. This is an example of a semantic analysis of break in linguistics. The problem is that break appears here again. I mean, here is broken. And there's no information whatsoever what this means. We're just supposed to know what broken means. But still, there is this, something is acting to cause something to happen. That part is essential for our understanding of events. So, I mean, I will build on that. But anyway, as I said, what I'm focusing on is to find the cognitive model of events here, not on the metaphysical, not on the linguistic aspects here. So, this is my model of an event. It consists of two vectors. There is a force vector, and force vectors may now be complicated force patterns. I mean, I simplify things by calling it a vector here, but it's a force pattern. It's an action. And then the action is happening to something, and this something is called a patient. I'm lifting the glass here. I mean, I'm exerting a force on this, and as the result is that the position of the glass is changed, and then the next action is that I drink from it. And that changes me, by the way. Anyway, so the model is basically you have two vectors, the force vector and the result vector. And the result vector describes the changes in the properties of the patient. The patient changes in some way. It may change its location, it may change its color, it may change its temperature, there is something of the properties that change. So the result vector comes from these domains of the objects of the patients. There can be changes in location, there can be changes in the category space, which is these properties that I talked about earlier. Very often, there is an agent that generates a force. Somebody is doing something. But it's not necessary. Sometimes, I mean, if you have fall or grow or die or something like that, there is no agent. There is just a force in the nature that generates the action. There is no agent here. But the force vector is still there. This is a very simplified model of an event, but I still think it captures the basic components of how we perceive an event. This is the cause, this is the effect. But what I do here is to add a little bit of geometry and topology and talk about them as vectors. And that will have some consequences, as we will see. So here's an example. Here is an agent. In this case, there is an agent pulling a sledge up a hill. So the force vector is directed like this. He's pulling up here, but the result vector is a movement in this direction. Because of friction and other gravitation, the force vector has a different direction than the result vector. So that's a very, very simple example. And as I said, the force vector is the cause, the result vector is the effect in this event. Now, these two vectors are the main components of an event. But then you can make things more complicated. You can add more parts into an event. So this is what linguists call thematic roles. Okay, I should say that this is work I've done. The verb semantics are done together with Massimo Vaglien and Mathis Weisserer. So this is joint work, so I should say we here. Anyway.
Peter, for clarification now.
Yep.
Are you saying that by definition all events are following this cause-effect structure?
Yep.
Okay, so
Yep.
you're standing and giving a talk.
Yeah.
Right? So am I really decomposing that in all the causes, like you buying your ticket and flying here and walking to the lecture theater and so on, to out of that construct now the event of you giving the talk? You
can describe an event on different levels of granularity, and this I haven't talked about. I mean, afterwards you can say that I was giving a talk. I mean, you can compress it into one, but you can decompose this into minutes. Yeah.
My suggestion, or my question is, I think if you vary the granularity, then in some sense at some point you have to sacrifice causality. Because then you have to talk about your intentions.
Sure. Yeah. No, intentions can be part of the causality. That can be part.
But still, there will be a point where the causality might be very difficult to hang on to. So it's a definitional issue.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Let's come back to this question when I've done the verbs, because I think we can see a little better. So. I want to say a little bit more about the components. An agent is an agent space. And an agent, in order to be an agent, must be able to exert a force. So there must be some kind of force domain associated with that. A patient could be any object. I mean, I call it category space here because, well, I didn't define that. But that's the object I talked about earlier. And it normally has a location in the physical space. We can talk about abstract events where the patient is an abstract thing, but in general they are physical. Then we can have instruments. Sometimes the force I'm exerting is not directly from me to the patient. It goes via an instrument. I can hammer on something, and the hammer will change the force vector. I mean, if I hammer on a nail, it won't happen. Not very much will happen. If I hammer with my hand on a nail, not very much will happen. I will get hurt. That's probably what's happening. But if I hammer with a hammer, my force will be magnified, and the nail will change its position. So instruments transform the force vector, and the real interesting force vector is the one that acts on the patient here. We can have counterforces. I already talked about friction, but there can also be counterforces. If I push on the door won't open. If I push on Andreas, he won't move, and so on. There are counterforces. So there is no simple mapping between the force exerted by the agent and what is the force, what's happening to the patient, because that depends on a number of factors like friction and other counterforces. And of course, there may be the intentions of the agent, which is part of the structure here. And I didn't plan to say much about the intentions, but if you want to, I can add that. Now, so let me go back. This is, I mean, basic model, but you can add a few things here. I mean, sometimes you have an action of giving, then there is not only one patient, but there are the object given, and then there's a recipient. Things get a little bit more complicated, but you could also divide that into two sub-events. Yeah. So I now have. Okay. Now.
One question: why do you explicitly mention the physical space? There isn't the physical space necessarily a subspace of both conceptual and agent spaces?
Not necessarily, because there are abstract situations where so if I say, what can I say? Summer is coming. It doesn't take place in any particular physical space. Well, summer is, maybe that's not a good example, because it takes place either in the northern hemisphere or in the southern hemisphere. But
summer than the agent.
I'm sorry.
Is summer the agent in this example?
No, actually not. This is the patient. Okay, it's not a good example. I shouldn't have given it. I can't find a good example of an abstract thing that.
The text return form.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can take all these institutional happenings. They're not happening in space, only in mental situations. But I mean, I will talk about fairly low-level examples here and stick to the physical space in general. Now, in philosophy, people talk about the semantics of a language, and then they focus on sentences. And sentences are propositions in philosophy, and propositions are expressed in terms of possible worlds. That's a very common semantic theory. It doesn't help us very much in understanding what goes on in our heads, because we don't have possible worlds in our heads, so we can do. I have a different analysis of what sentences do. They express events. A typical sentence expresses an event. That's my basic semantic theory. And a sentence doesn't express a full event. It peaks out normally, well, not normally, but it can be sufficient to use at least one vector and one entity, the patient. So basic sentence, either a force vector and a patient, as when the glass was hit. I mean, that's a force vector and a patient. Or the glass broke. That's a patient or I'm hitting the glass, and there's the force vector, but then there are two entities. So this is a minimum. At least one vector and one entity is a minimum for a sentence. And of course, that maps onto subject and noun phrase and verb phrase. But when we see an event, we focus on something. We don't take in the visual process. We don't take in everything. We focus on something. The sentence focuses on one vector and one entity. And this focusing can be different. I mean, if I say Victoria hits Oscar, I'm focusing on what Victoria is doing. But if I say Oscar was hit by Victoria, I'm focusing on what's happening to Oscar. So I changed the focus here. And that means that in this sentence, here is the subject, this is the object. Here is the subject, this is the object in grammatical terms. But this is the agent, this is the patient, this is patient, this is the patient, this is the agent. There is no simple mapping between subject and object and patient and agent. That depends on how you focus here. The subject in English and many other languages is very often the thing that is focused on and doesn't determine whether the focused thing is in the agent or patient. Okay, I don't want to talk very much about sentences. I want to talk about verbs. They are involved, of course, but I have...
Is it true that the meaning of every sentence is
No, but this is the prototypical use of a sentence is to express an event. That's my... Then, of course, we have lots of abstract constructions that we express as sentences that may not... I mean, they may correspond to very abstract events, but I would say that basic sentences, prototypical sentences, express events. If you look at how people normally talk, I mean, or how children learn languages, this is how. So I'm not saying that this is a rule without exceptions, because I haven't done all of the analysis.
But Peter, isn't that counterintuitive? I mean, events implies change in your case.
Yeah.
There was an agent and patient, right?
Mm.
Although we can describe many things in sentences that have nothing to do with change.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that I count a state where the result vector is null as an event.
Okay.
That should be said. Thank you. I missed that. So even states, I mean, I check as I classify as events, but then the result vector is null.
No agent.
Yeah, that can be an agent even if nothing happens.
Wait, so if your result vector is 0.
No. You can have a force vector that is counterbalanced by So let's see now.
But how about sentences that just state features like
Yeah.
this water is not
Yeah.
sparkling, or
Yeah.
the water is wet? This would be an event on your account.
Yeah, it's a state, but it's
So just stating properties.
yeah. But then there is no force vector, but there can be like in this. The bottle stands on the table. Standing is a good example here, because then there is this force of going down, and there is a counter force going up. These balance each other, but there is no result vector.
Yeah, but wait. So we have a prototypical model now, if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Of what an event is, right? And it means there's an agent and there's a patient, and there are forces exchanged between the two. Now you say sentences always express events.
Mhm.
Okay. And of course, since we're sort of trying to annoy you.
Of course.
We generate
That's why you're here.
examples.
That's why you're here.
Hey, wait a moment. We have an exception now.
Yeah.
But now, for you to deal with these exceptions, you seem to include them by definition, broadening the notion also of event.
Mhm.
So if in the end event is an agent and a patient plus loads of exceptions,
yeah.
how useful is it as a definition?
No. I mean, it's just that I allow the force vectors and the result vectors to be null.
Yeah, but you also said we might not have an agent, like in.
No, yeah, sure. But there is always a patient, and there is always a result, even if the result is just that things stay as they are.
Then it's fair to say an event is a patient.
No, that's not enough. That's not enough. Okay.
Yeah. But there are other cases of non-prototypical sentences. So if you say there's a sponge sitting there without a brain, then you would say, well, this is a special case of a null force, null activity,
That's
event.
yeah.
But if we come to certain more abstract sentences, such as all humans are mortal, you would not claim that there's an event immanent to that. Or say all walking implies having legs or something.
Or propositions about mathematical.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
States that, comma, and so forth.
Well, what about a really simple sentence like the apple is red?
That's no problem. It's a state. I mean, there is the patient. It's apple, and it's
the force.
There's no force. Then there's a force. Then the result vector is just a point in color space. Is normally used as a verb in English to mark a state. I mean, is a null placeholder for a null force vector.
Yeah, but Peter, then I'm back where I was a few minutes ago, that the only distinguishing feature in your definition of an event is that there's a patient. And for the rest.
No, there must be either a force vector or a result vector. They can be null, but
the result vector is 0, so it's not there.
But still, it's no, it's not. It's still there. It's a point in a space. It's a vector that points to itself. No, it doesn't mean 0. It means that it's a point in the space. No change. I mean, the apple is red. It means that the apple is staying at the point in color space where that belongs to the red region.
No, but wait, you just told Kevin that then there's only patient.
There is the patient, and there is no force, but there is a result vector. The result vector is a null vector, but it's located in a domain, and it's located in the color domain in this case.
Well, let's see where
Let's see how we go on, because I think you will see how I use this.
I'm very worried about your patient, you see.
Okay, you're very worried about patient. Okay, the patient will survive. So, okay. I was somewhere here, I guess. Yes, let's now get into it. So, this is my strong assumption about verbs. This I think is new. A verb is a convex region of vectors that depend only on a single domain. And so now this is very abstract, and I'll try to explain it. The domain, the vector is either now result vectors or force vectors here, and the single domain is let me see here now. So, push refers to the force vector of an event, and it belongs to the force domain. Move refers to changes in the spatial domain of the result vector. And if you're heating something, it refers to changes in the temperature. These are 3 basic examples. And The strong thing I'm claiming here, and now I'm really sticking out my neck. I mean, this is empirical claim. The other discussions about the construction of events are more abstract modeling. But this is, I'm making a strong connection between the notion of a domain and the use of verbs here. I claimed earlier that adjectives belong to a single domain. Adjectives mark colors, that mark sizes, that mark temperatures, and so on. I make the similar claim now for verbs, that verbs refer to single domains. And that will have fairly strong consequences. So, I claim that there are no verbs that mean walk and burn, because that would involve multiple domains. There are no verbs that mean crawl or run, because that's not the convex part of the action space. There could be verbs that mean walk or run, because that could probably form a convex region of motion space. But really different actions would not be expressed by one single verb.
But isn't it, I mean, just coming back to the point that I tried to make earlier, the same with actions and events, that they can be composites? So if I say, you thanks for welcoming me so nicely, okay? And you are welcoming me. Obviously, if we break it down in what you call actions, this will involve walking, smiling, saying something.
No,
lots of things, raising your eyebrows.
No, yes, but yes.
So there can be composite actions or events at least.
But okay, welcome is fairly abstract because it involves social relations, and there are thousands of physical ways of doing this. Of course, each event involves a number of details. But when we come to classifying it as a welcoming event, there are certain features that are necessary. And some are not, I don't care whether I raise my eyebrows or not when you welcome me. There will still be a welcoming thing. So this is, there is an event with lots of features, but the meaning of a welcoming concerns only one domain of that event, is my claim here.
Sorry.
Yep.
And for example, the verb heating. So if I heat an iron, it will both change the temperature and its color. So
yes.
it will actually go to two domains, or do I misunderstand you?
Yes, but you could also heat the thing without its changing color. So it's, as I said, an event involves lots of changes. But the meaning of heat is only to change the temperature. So then you have lots of side effects of that. But that's not part of the meaning of heat. Sometimes you change the color, sometimes not.
But Peter, just to understand, okay? I mean, isn't this in some sense possibly circular? Because you could argue, look, the verbs that survive in our language are those that have, let's say, non-overlapping meanings, because otherwise it doesn't really help us in everyday life.
Yep.
And aren't you restating that actually in this way? I'm not restating. Okay, first, it's not circular because I'm reducing semantics of verbs to the notion of domain. I haven't given you a very precise definition of domain, so that gives a lot of vagueness to this theory. And you're right. I mean, verbs that had that meaning, or if we try to induce them, they wouldn't survive because they would not be learnable. So I connect this thesis a lot to what is learnable, what is easy to learn in a language. Of course, you can introduce these notions artificially, but they normally don't survive in a communication system. You have to, yeah. Okay.
So this is basically a learnability constraint. Yeah.
So, but all this only holds for concrete actions. So if I say, typical things like I study medicine.
Yep.
Then the verb to study, I think, has a fairly well subscribed meaning. We can even define criteria for when and how to admit somebody to studying medicine.
Yeah.
That's an important issue, obviously. But I would severely doubt that this refers to a single domain, because it's not a concrete, spatially and temporally very defined action. Like, opening the bottle.
Yeah.
I can see for these concrete short events.
Yeah.
That are very circumscribed.
I agree that there are lots of.
But studying medicine can be lifelong, and you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean, and I have problems with these more abstract things like study because I don't know what are the more important underlying domains. I mean, studying means somehow changing your mental state and learning something or trying to learn something. I mean, it's a complex, very complex situation. I don't know how to describe the underlying domain there. I still think, I still hope I could do it in some kind of abstract representations of what is needed for study, but I haven't done it. I can't give you the answer.
But so your assumption is that this is just like a few exceptions of verbs that violate thesis too?
No, they're not exceptions. They're unanalyzed cases. I still
I think we can come up with hundreds of examples.
Yeah.
If you go through the Duden.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
probably
Sure.
will violate
No,
thesis.
you can't. The problem is that we don't know what is the relevant domains for many of these abstract things.
Well, I think if you look for examples, you will find some. For example, to walk, you may say this is just movement in one direction, but then there are two meanings of walk. If I walk a dog,
Yeah.
then obviously there's a second aspect. I do not only move in one direction through space, but I also cause somebody else to, namely my.
Walking is not just moving in one dimension because it involves a certain force pattern.
In a very same sense, if I say I color a wall or I darken a room,
Yeah.
I do something to the cause something, apply some force, but then it has a visual aspect too. If it's not colored after, it will not be coloring. If it's not darker in the room, then one would say I have darkened the room by shutting the curtains or something.
Yeah, but then you're changing the color domain or the light domain there. I mean,
But it's also making accepting force.
yeah, sure. Okay. Let me get back to color and darken and so on. I mean, let me give you my examples, my analysis here, and then we can have this more general discussion. First of all, this idea of identifying verbs with vectors explains similarities of verb meanings. So walking and running are similar in meaning because they express similar force patterns that are similar. They explain subcategories of walk. I mean, English is full of different kinds of verbs that specify special types of walking. And you even have the department for silly walks, if I understand Monty Python correctly. And the ministry, thank you. Okay. And so, walking is a generic way. I mean, there are lots of force patterns that can be classified as walks, I mean, including the silly walks. And I mean, marching is a particular type of walking that involves a certain subclass of force patterns. I mean, you stiffen your legs or whatever you do. And all these describe. And you can identify them as subcategories. But in my model, they would be sub-regions of the action space for walking. And doing this in a symbolic language is quite difficult, but doing it is in vector representations, you will get these subcategories out of the force pattern representations. You can understand metaphorical uses of verbs. I mean, this is a case for a story about a boy who had spilled milk on the table, and he was sucking up the milk, and it was explained as he's vacuuming with his mouth. And that's a very neat metaphor. I mean, you haven't heard it before, but you immediately understand what's going on here. Because the force pattern, and when you're using a vacuum cleaner, is the same as he's using in his mouth when he's sucking the milk. And that's why this works as a metaphor. You're transferring the force pattern of vacuuming into this doing with his mouth. And we understand this metaphor. Or, to give you another facing, okay, go ahead.
Peter, but vacuum is an interesting example, right? Because it actually comes from a noun, from the vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, but it
got transformed to do a verb.
Sure.
Then you could say, yeah, maybe this is indirectly linking now to nouns and not to verbs anymore.
Well, actually, the first vacuum cleaners were not objects; they were tubes from the wall. But that's a different part of the story. I think vacuum is a proper verb, and it exemplifies a certain force pattern. I mean, there is a tube that sucks in things. That's a basic.
To this cross-domain association that I was curious about, it could link you now into a space of objects with certain properties.
Yeah, but that's another coupling. I mean, how you go from nouns to verbs and vice versa. That's a different story. It's interesting, but Now this is, okay, another example of a metaphor. In tennis, you slice you slice a ball when you're hitting it. You're slicing with your racket. Normally you slice with a knife on a bread or a cheese or whatever. There's a thing you move in a vertical direction in order to do something. And slicing with your racket is the same kind of force pattern. You transfer the slicing of the bread into the slicing of a tennis hit. You can have a look at sports pages. They're full of metaphors that they use to describe them. And we can, the basic underlying reason here is that there are similarities in force patterns. That's why we can use them as metaphors. Now we get into a linguistic topic here, manner and result verbs. That's something that's very hot in linguistics, at least in verb semantics at the moment, and I will explain what it means. A manner verb this is my interpretation, describes the force vector, the course. Manner verbs is how you do something, and the result verbs are the result. And there is a claim in linguistics that all verbs are either manner or result. And it's a contended claim and people are fighting over it. But on this theory, I get this more or less automatically. Because once you have the force vector, I mean, from the one domain hypothesis, if a verb refers to a force vector, it's a manner verb. If it refers to some other domain, it's a result verb. So I get this division for free. So let me give you some examples. The verb push. Come on. It's a force applied to an object. I mean, you're pushing on a door here. Prototypically, the push leads to change of position of the object, but here is a counter force, so there is no change of the door. But it's still a case of pushing. The result vector is null here. And you can test what are the expectations. I mean, normally when you say I push the door, you expect that it would change. But you can also say I pushed the door, but it didn't open. You have this but to say that this is not normal. But still, push is a manner verb. This is how you do it. Instead of pulling it or instead of hitting it or kicking it, you're pushing it. And push means, well, normally force in a horizontal direction, but there can be other uses. So here is a result verb like changes an object, open a thing, grow a thing, paint a thing. You can paint a house in many different ways, with a brush, with a roller, with a spray can or whatever. And so paint itself doesn't tell you anything about how it's done. Paint means that there is a result here. And it doesn't determine the forces, it's just describing the result vector. And you can divide them into two different kinds here. Move and change of position, like move and open, or change of properties like heat or shrink or paint or grow or whatever. So there are two subdivisions here of the result verbs. A little side remark on verbs in the brain. These are pictures from Friedemann, maybe not from yesterday, but you all recognize these things here. And Friedemann has been very good in showing the mapping between body-related verbs and motor cortex. But all the verbs you mentioned yesterday, I really checked them. They were manner verbs. They were kick, pick, and lick, and so on. They relate to what you do with your body. They're all manner verbs. And that's very nice that the manner verbs show up in the motor cortex. I mean, I analyze manner verbs as force vectors. Force vectors are related to control of I mean, if we talk about body movements here, control of exerting forces and so on. I mean, they are generated from the motor cortex. So that's a very nice mapping. But you can then ask, of course, what happens if you look at the result verbs in the brain? And very few people have done that. I mean, there are a couple examples by Kemmerer and so on. No, but there was very little about this. So I talked my colleagues in Lund and Oslo into doing an fMRI experiment. Well, I should say, I have a quote here from Friedemann. He says that well, okay, let me describe the experiment. We did an experiment that we let people read manner verbs and result verbs, and then we hooked them up to an fMRI and looked. And the prediction was that, here it's very vague, but other parts. But Friedemann has this idea that the general distinction between action and perceptual related knowledge corresponds to a frontal and a posterior area. Now, that quote I don't think has anything to do with verbs. I mean, but if you apply it to verbs, you would say that the result verbs would activate more posterior parts of the brain. We have the data. I mean, this is the distinction where the basic distinction between the manner verbs contra the result verbs. So the yellow parts are what's activated by the, I'm sorry, the other way around. The yellow parts are what's activated by the result verbs that are not activated to the same extent by manner verbs. And you see there is a bit of more posterior thing here. What is this? The gyrus? No, it's further down. It's further down. It's the insula. It lights up and.
Friedemann should know.
Yeah.
Well, we're looking at
Vision, right?
I mean, these ones. Yeah.
Yeah, probably slightly closer to
Yeah.
because it could be.
The analysis is very rough, and it's not done yet. So I don't really want to spend time on this, and I don't have the competence to do it either. But anyway, we get differences fairly distinct differences between manner verbs and result verbs. So the result verbs are treated by different parts of the brain. Then you have to go into the details, and we haven't done that yet. I just want to make a connection here. Another connection is to robotics. Some groups are trying to analyze, extract verbs from objects, human interactions, and other things. And this is a picture from Erholzer Hint's group in Ankara, where he tries to identify the following verbs: reached, picked, pushed, pulled, knocked, disappeared, and looked at by human goes out here. I mean, picked and pulled are actually manner verbs. But if you see if you look at this, they interpret them as result verbs. So if you look at the literature in robotics, they treat all verbs as being by looking at the result vectors, not looking at the forces that are involved in doing this. So in robotics, the focus has been on result verbs. And I want to say that maybe we should go on and have a look at the manner, look at the force patterns exerted by the robot or by the human that are analyzed in this situation. So there's a kind of bias. In the brain literature, the focus has been on the manner verbs. In the robotics literature, it's been on the result verbs. And you have to look at both of them. Okay, these are two side remarks. Now let me get back to, I have more things to say about the verbs, but let's do that in the discussion. I mean, this is a kind of concluding picture here. I've talked a little bit about nouns and adjectives, and I've talked more about the verbs here, based on force and result vectors. But I can, and I said something about sentences mapping onto events, I can do a similar analysis to other word classes. Most adverbs modifying verbs, they are magnifiers of vectors, or they're modifying vectors. If I push something strongly, the force vector is magnified. If I open something slowly, the temporal pattern of the change is different, and so on. The change takes longer time. So the adverbs are modifying the vectors, magnifying them, shrinking them, and so on. Prepositions are interesting because most of linguistics, prepositions are thought of as spatial relations. But if you look closer, and there are some people who have done it, it turns out that there are lots of force relations involved in prepositions as well. And I think that you can have prepositions also have some kind of basic domain. But that's another story. So I just put up this picture because this is part of my general semantic program, to use conceptual spaces to give some kind of cognitive semantics for word classes. If you look at traditional linguistics, people normally define these word classes in terms of the syntactic properties. But I think there are good cognitive reasons why we have these word classes, and I've tried to give you some of the reasons for how they show up. So I mean, by now it's fairly trivial that verbs refer to the vectors, while nouns refer to the agent or the patient of an event, and adjectives or modifiers of the agents or patients, and so on. This has been a fairly rhapsodic talk, and I've gotten a lot of criticism already, or attempts to find counterexamples, and I like that. I can't answer all of the criticisms, but I hope I've given you some idea of how to understand, how to model actions in events by using forces. I mean, to summarize my talk, I wanted to bring out the role of the force domain in our understanding of actions and events. Thank you very much.
Great. Is Dimitri around somewhere?
Okay, he's still sleeping. All right, time for questions. Andreas.
Oh, the microphone is on. I still have some problems with your definition of, confining actions just to the force patterns. Because I always thought that, at least intuitively, it makes a lot of sense to include for instance, some aspects of the environment in it. Mm-hmm. So, if I give you a force pattern, which is like this, depending on whether I have a knife in my hand and whether your back is next to me or not, this can mean I'm stabbing you from the back and I'm killing you at a sort of higher level, including some goals or event-like characteristics. Or it could mean I'm in front of your house and I'm knocking your door. And if all this happens on a planet with totally different properties in gravity and atmosphere, it could mean that I'm catapulting myself in outer space or something. Yep. So I wonder, to me it seems quite inevitable that, just the force pattern as such, I could be sort of, be surrounded in a medium with much higher viscosity, and then I can have a force pattern, and it just it would by necessity be part of a totally different set of events.
No, you're perfectly right, and I didn't emphasize that.
So why not include this in your definition of actions?
It can be included as a constraint on a certain, as you say, if I do this with or without a knife or with or without a hammer, it's a totally different action. But it's the same force pattern. But you can then partition the space of all possible force patterns into, you can have as a constraint on this partitioning that there is a hammer involved or there is a knife involved. That's an additional constraint on delimiting the force patterns. And of course, many verbs presume that kind of object involved in the action. If I'm using the verb hammer, I can. The typical verb of a hammer is involving this object. Of course, I can hammer with my hand. I'm using it as a hammer, but that's a metaphorical use of hammer with your hand. So you're right, but I don't really see it's an exception. I see it as an additional factor. The object may be part of constraining the space of force patterns that are involved. So you're right in that.
All right.
Thanks so much for a wonderful talk. Can I hear more about the results on these different action verbs you looked into? One little remark. I think we were not very picky with regard to selecting verbs because there were not enough, or we would have liked to have many more to study and get good signals, and we were not picky. We took grasp and we took hammer and result verbs as well, and push and things like that. So they were included in these early studies. But with regard to your results, this seemed to be prefrontal and premotor activation, where the result verbs produce stronger activation than the manner verbs, which may not be fully intuitive in first. So my question first, is there the reverse difference also, where the manner verbs produce more activation? And then with regard to matching of psycholinguistic properties, were you exactly sure that they were similar word frequency, length?
Yeah.
And
No, we
what was
checked all the.
checked
Yeah, okay. This was done in Norwegian, so the verbs was done in Oslo, Norwegian verbs, and we checked for frequency, we checked for length, and the problem with Norwegian is that most of them have Norwegian verbs have prepositions, and we wanted to exclude that. So we had, but to answer your questions, if you look at the manner verbs in contrast to the result verbs, the differences are smaller. I mean, they are still there, but they are not so significant. The contrast manner, result versus manner is much larger. Then the problem with the result verbs is that they are of so many different kinds. They involve intentions or goal fulfillment and not goal fulfillment. They involve all kinds of domains. I mean, color, heating, and so on. So they should form a much more complex system than the manner verbs.
Did you also have them rated with regard to semantic action relatedness, so that you can be sure that not one group is strongly action related while the other one is more distantly?
You can't do that because the manner verbs are by definition action related, and the result verbs are, yeah. No, we didn't do that.
If you do semantic ratings, you sometimes get
we didn't do that.
Unintuitive, surprising results, because subjects do not always agree with the linguistic classification.
No.
But thanks very much. That's very important.
I mean, we are still analyzing the data, and that's basically not my job. So the paper will.
I'm sorry, I have to apologize, but I have to catch my
Okay,
plane.
please. Nice having you here.
All right, other questions? Aha, Jens, you did that on purpose.
Maybe I can do it without the microphone.
Yeah, you start screaming and I'll...
In your model of sentences, how would you expand that to include pragmatics, like speech acts, let's say? Because it seems like in your idea, a sentence is used to describe something, not to act.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I haven't done anything with pragmatics in this sense, but of course, maybe the primary uses of language would be more like commands, and then I mean, I tell you, open the door. I mean, that has a different linguistic structure. It's not a description of an event. I'm commanding an event to take place, and I'm supposing you to be the agent here. You should cause the door to become open. And very often, you can have two kinds of commands. One involving a result, which I think is the most common one. I ask you to open the door. I don't care about how you do it. But I can also, of course, instruct you how to do something. Use a manner verb. I can say hammer on the nail. I mean, that's a manner verb. So I don't really have a good answer to your question, but of course commands also involve the elements of an event, but they have because it's a different pragmatic function. The linguistic expressions will be a bit different. It's a good question, but I can't give you very much of an answer here.
Armin.
So, given the counterexamples we have tried to find, we would somehow agree that it does not cover all language possible. What is how have you an estimate how much you actually cover? And then, as perhaps a follow-up, how does it really help you? Or what is the understanding that you now take from this? So how does it help you to better understand language in general?
I have no estimate of how much I cover. My goal is to look at, I have a kind of learning program here, to look at how is it possible that children can learn 10 new words per day. I mean, this is the basic estimate you get from their 2 years and older and on. They learn 10 new words. We must have some kind of constraints on our semantics that makes this possible. And if you know that something is marked as an adjective in language, and you pick out this pattern that whatever marks, then you know as a kid implicitly that you should look for a particular domain that this related to. If something is marked as a verb, you should look for parts of an event that relates to this verb and so on. So my theory is to kind of given some constraints that can be helpful in explaining how kids learn language. And that means that's the main reason why I'm focusing or trying to look at the more concrete verbs and nouns and so on. And I don't emphasize, I haven't come as far as looking at the more abstract domains because we learn them later and they're dependent on our understanding how society and the world works and so on. So I try to focus on words that come early in children's language. And there, I mean, if I get problems there, then my theory will have problems. I don't bother at this stage very much about the abstract, more abstract levels.
Just from my understanding, what do we mean marked as a verb? How would the child actually see that it's actually a verb?
And there are lots of syntactic markers for verbs. I mean, positions or yeah. I mean, they pick up the syntactic markers, but they are clues to what is the underlying, what is the type of meaning. I mean, that's why I had this last page here. I mean, by the syntactic markers, you can see what it is, and then you know what kind of semantic meaning to look for. Of course, you don't know exactly what domain it's related to, but you know there is some domain, and then you have to figure out from the context what is the relevant.
Would you say it's always this direction, or could it also be the other direction, that given what domain something is in, I actually then recognize it as a verb or as an action? Or
yeah, of course. Of course. I mean, in English, for instance, there are lots of words that function both as nouns and verbs. I mean, there is a lot of. Then you have to look at its position in the sentence, or whether, I mean, the general context to decide whether it's a noun and a verb. Yeah.
Alex.
I am wondering if your theory is intended also to help the people who have the task to construct artificial agents, and if so, how would you approach that? Or are there attempts to do that, some like computational models or something?
There are some groups who are trying to learn robots to identify actions. I mean, I mentioned Sahin's group. There are some other groups working on identifying verbs. And what I noticed when looking at these groups is that they focus on the result verbs. And I would say that maybe if you want a robot to understand what a human is doing, teach the robot to extract the force patterns, just as humans do in the Johansson pictures. That would be one way to go further in this direction, I would say. And yeah.
I'm a little more concerned with the conceptual spaces. So this infinite number of dimensions, how would you represent that on a robot?
No, that's a problem, of course. You have to reduce the number of dimensions. But if it comes to, well, human actions are fairly complex as they are, but simple actions like pushing and pulling, I mean, you could identify by looking at the forces that you must exert to push an object or pull an object. But yeah, it's not easy, but yeah.
So,
thank you for your talk. So I would like to come back to this question about the intentionality. Because, so I think this is an important dimension for understanding perhaps not all verbs, but many verbs that concern human action. So how would you include intentionality in your framework?
Friedemann left here. Was one slide on the data we used for the fMRI. We had triad. So you have 3 manner verbs, and you had to decide which of the 2 lower ones were more similar to the upper one. But that was just the data. So adverbs, I skip. Here we go. Okay. Intentional verbs. So you have to add a goal space in order. And a goal space is a space that has results. I mean, you're at the position in your conceptual space. The goal space is another point. I mean, so there is a vector going from your current state to the desired state. That's how a goal space would be constructed. And in languages, there are some verbs that make this distinction. Kill versus murder is one. I mean, kill is unintentional, can be both murderous, definitely intentional. Here's another one I like. Wink is an intentional blink. But what happens here is that when you have an intentional verb, you have two events actually. There are two results. One is the physical change. I mean, I'm moving from one place to another. I mean, this is the physical result vector, if you like. And then there is the achievement of the goal. That is that you have ended up in the desired region of the goal space. So in an intentional verb, you're actually representing double events. The one relating to the physical action needed and one related to your goal space. That's my basic analysis of intentionality in verbs.
Great. Peter, another question. So in your scheme, where let's say first you have different ways to define, let's say, the atoms of language, like verbs, nouns, and so on, and at the bottom it says sentences. But now to go from the linguistic atoms to sentences, actually you need some hidden magic, right? Like syntax or so. So how are you going to get that step defined in the theory that you have in mind?
I don't have a theory of syntax. I know that you need compositions of words. I can do what is called proto-language. I mean, just putting together semantic things. And I have some ideas of adjectives and nouns. Nouns and verbs would correspond to different positions in this event schema.
That's what I was expecting.
Yeah.
That you would say that this very specific structure of these force vectors, the result force and the agent and the patient, would implicitly also define syntactic structure. So that's also what you have in mind.
To some extent, they will not define syntax because there are so many different ways of generating syntax out of in languages. They will constrain syntax.
Okay.
That's what's happening here.
Okay, great, very good. Other questions? Then if not, Peter, thank you very much. Great talk.
Thank you.